Thanks, Lawrence. Nigel Wallace, an ILC trustee, amongst other things. As a former lawyer, I was very heartened by that part of Ben's presentation where some respondents were asking who they could sue if they got the wrong advice or guidance. Now, I'm a huge supporter of the CAB. I think they do wonderful work, and they're full of warm and enthusiastic people. Sometimes their expertise may be outrun by their enthusiasm, but I can certainly see some of them crossing the line between guidance and advice without even realising it. So who do people sue if they get the wrong guidance, stroke advice, do the wrong thing, it's impossible to unwind it? What redress do they get, and who do they get it from?
Can I pass that first of all to Maggie, I think? Because, I'm not that we should sue the Financial Conduct Authority.
Heaven forbid. Right, a couple of things. First of all, I think, I take your point, absolutely, Nigel. First of all, I think we need to remember, is this thing, can people hear me okay? Yeah. We need to remember that the guide, that pension-wise, I have to keep remembering to call that, pensions-wise sits in a different regulatory world. It is not part of the regulated advice world, and without getting too techie on this, it has an exception from our regulated activities order. So it's not a question, it's in a different part of the forest. So it's not abiding by the same rules as a regulated firm. It has to abide by our FCA standards. So that in itself means that the chances of it straying into regulated advice are different, they're less because it's operating to our FCA standards. And we did that deliberately because what we wanted to do was be able to do the sorts of things I've talked about in terms of relevant personalisation. And if we hadn't taken it out of the regulated activities order, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So that's the first point. The second point is this point around it is the customer's, it's ultimately the individual's responsibility what decision they take. Now, if they take that decision off the back of the guidance guarantee, that's their responsibility. If they then go on to take financial advice, then they move into the regulated world and the advisor has a responsibility. But beyond all that, there will be a complaints mechanism which Treasury are currently developing about if someone gets the wrong information or something like that. So, for example, if in your example, the citizens' advice person, their enthusiasm overcame them and they forgot to mention the tax liability. That's, so that has to be developed by Treasury, but it's not the same sort of mechanism as would apply because pensions-wise is not living in the regulated advice world. This is an important question, Nigel, and it goes back to the difference between guidance and advice. We have to make it clear to people that if you get guidance or something else that is not advice, you will have somebody, a kind of friend, to help you understand the questions that you need to consider. It's only when you get the advice that somebody will give you the answers. Otherwise, you have to find the answers for yourself. And whether we can help people understand this is, a kind of mate down the pub, or somebody giving you advice, a wise friend, probably not a mate down the pub, but somebody who knows a bit about these things, but is not taking your own individual circumstances and not giving you the answers, that we will actually help people have more realistic expectations about what you get for free and what you have to pay for. Advisors qualify, they spend years qualifying to be experts that can help you individually. Like an architect or something, if you went to an architect and said, I want to do an extension to my house, could you draw me up a plan and help me find all the right things? You wouldn't dream of them doing that for you for free. And that's kind of the distinction that we need to get across, but we haven't done so far. And then the question of suing becomes much less relevant, because if you're just asking a friend for an opinion, giving you the parameters you need to think about, but it's your decision, it becomes clear. And if you want somebody to have responsibility for the decision with you, you need to go to an actual advisor that you know.
And I think if you look at the evolution of this policy, when the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that there were to be these new freedoms, I think you can detect then there was an attempt to kind of retrofit a package around it to make sure that people didn't end up with being worse off or in the worst kind of world with their money, savings running out in later years. So I think it is true to say today that it's still a bit experimental. I think the whole evolution of this guidance stroke advice strategy. And I think the confusion, I'm afraid, will need to be resolved at some point between these two different sort of themes of advice and guidance. And I don't think we're quite there yet. And if you look at the pension scheme bill, I think some of this confusion is inherent in the legislation. So, for example, we have the guidance service for people who are entering the decumulation phase. What do I do with my cash pot? But if you're in that world where you're in a DB scheme and you're looking to come out and maybe cash up and go into a DC scheme so you can take advantage of the flexibilities, there the trustees are required to check that someone's obtained appropriate independent advice. And if advice is appropriate in that world, well, I'm sorry, someone's bound to ask the question, why isn't it appropriate in the other scenario, which is likely to be the much more common one? So I think this is a journey. I think this question about who is going to be sued is a tremendously fraught one. I don't think I just hope it's not me, by the way, in the middle of all this, but I don't think it's literally just about that. What is the real risk that we need to mitigate here? That people actually end up in this terrible scenario a few years out, where they've just run out of money. They didn't get the right advice and the savings have gone. At that point, I can tell you will know this as a politician as well, they won't just be looking at someone to sue. There'll be a political reckoning, and there will also be, potential role for the ombudsman and all sorts of other people who will be sort of popping up at that point saying, the government sort of didn't explain this properly and so on. It is a tremendously fraught area. I really do worry that, when we turn on the Money Box programme in 5 years' time, hopefully we'll still hear Ross pining, that'd be great. But what I dread is turning on that radio and hearing people coming on the programme, hundreds of them saying, but my money's run out. I wasn't given the right information at the time. What am I going to do? And we're all taxpayers. What are we going to do at that point? Are we going to turn a blind eye and let poverty return for hundreds of thousands of old folk? I don't think so. So it is desperately important we get this right. And I hope that, if this is a journey, and we haven't really necessarily got every aspect of it right, we're prepared to listen and to change the structure of this advice/guidance service. When we realise that things are not working out, we've got to be alert to the risk. I want the freedoms to be there for people. I think it's important, but I really think we need to make sure we've covered the principal risks off. And right now, I'm not 100% sure we have.
Okay, thank you. I saw Dean with his hand up a couple of seconds ago, and I took it to be that he wanted to answer the question rather than saying I'm the guy you should sue, but perhaps you could clarify that.
I thought it was worth repeating again where we got to with our conclusion sign, which was that we couldn't foresee, having gone through all of this process, that going forward, both now and post-April, that consumers could consistently get what we believe were those good outcomes without advice, and made a very conscious decision right throughout the business that we would only deliver retirement options in an advised environment. And one of the big parts that, or one of the big elements that played a part in that decision was very much that people acting independently and making their own choices typically do buy single products and single options which give set outcomes. And we believe for a lot of people that won't be a good outcome going forward. That we do believe that actually focusing on what am I trying to achieve and then working and collaborating with an advisor in how they get that will actually end up, even with people with quite conservative pots, that may still be about, well actually, if you take 30% of your pot rather than just 25%, and the additional 5% you take out gives you an additional buffer because of that concern you've got over here, could be a very different outcome for a client, and they understand the consequence of that. It can be as simple as, and one of the really good examples we had the other day was going back to this whole issue of what about people who've got debt, that coming across a client who's got £10,000 of credit card debt that they're servicing at £500 a month. I can't generate £500 of income from 10,000, no matter what I do. No matter what risk somebody's prepared to take, it's not going to happen. So it's actually engaging with the client around, is the impact of clearing that debt and therefore freeing up £500 a month going to be a better outcome? So it's not just about, that's what I was probably trying to get across earlier, is that the outcome is the solution, not the product. And it's really matching really what they're trying to achieve around that, to agree what that looks like, and also to agree that consequence.
Okay.